I should have seen the signs earlier, but when you're drowning in your own home, it's hard to recognize that the people throwing you life preservers are the same ones who pushed you overboard. My name is Anya Sharma, and at 29, I had become the invisible foundation that held my family's entire digital existence together, while simultaneously being treated like their greatest disappointment. The morning everything changed started like any other nightmare disguised as normalcy. I had positioned myself in the corner of our living room, laptop balanced on my knees, trying to conduct what I hoped would be my breakthrough job interview. The position was with Technova Solutions, a promising startup that specialized in digital transformation for small businesses. After 6 months of unemployment following my layoff from DataSync Corp., I needed this opportunity more than my next breath. The severance package had long since evaporated, and my savings account was running on fumes. I had spent the entire weekend preparing for this interview. I researched every member of their leadership team, memorized their company values, and practiced my responses to potential technical questions until I could recite them in my sleep. I had even bought a new blazer specifically for this video call, hoping to project the confidence I desperately needed to feel. My mother Carol had other plans. As soon as I began my introduction with Sarah Chen, Technova's CTO, Carol materialized from the kitchen wielding our industrial-strength Dyson vacuum cleaner. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. She had been hovering nearby all morning, finding increasingly creative ways to interrupt my preparation. First, it was the sudden urgent need to rearrange the living room furniture. Then came the impromptu phone conversation with her sister about their book club, conducted at maximum volume directly outside my chosen interview space. But the vacuum was her masterpiece of sabotage. She began her cleaning routine directly behind me, making deliberate, theatrical passes across the hardwood floor that had been spotless since yesterday's cleaning session. The machine roared like a commercial jet engine, drowning out both my carefully rehearsed answers and Sarah's follow-up questions. "Mom," I whispered urgently during a brief pause when Sarah was checking her notes, my hand cupped over the microphone in a futile attempt to maintain some semblance of professionalism. "I'm in an interview." Her response came with the practiced innocence of someone who had perfected the art of plausible deniability over decades. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry," she announced, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry clearly through my laptop's microphone. "I didn't realize you were busy, but surely you can understand that I can't be expected to live in this mess." She gestured dramatically at the immaculate living room, her tone carrying that particular note of martyrdom that could make Mother Teresa seem selfish by comparison. I watched Sarah's face on my screen, saw the moment when her expression shifted from interested professionalism to barely concealed irritation. She was clearly wondering what kind of person couldn't manage to find a quiet space for an important interview. What kind of family dynamics would allow such blatant disrespect for professional obligations? "Perhaps we should reschedule," Sarah suggested after the third interruption made it impossible for me to complete a sentence about my experience with cloud infrastructure migration. "No, please," I said, the desperation bleeding through my professional facade. "I can handle this. My family just doesn't understand the importance of." The vacuum roared to life again, this time accompanied by Carol's theatrical sighing and muttering about young people these days, and no consideration for their hard-working mothers. The interview was a disaster of epic proportions. By the time the call mercifully ended, I knew I had lost not just this opportunity, but potentially any chance of Sarah recommending me to other companies in her network. The tech industry was smaller than people realized, and word traveled fast about candidates who couldn't handle basic professional requirements. As soon as my laptop screen went dark, Carol switched off the vacuum and returned to the kitchen, humming cheerfully as if nothing had happened. The sudden silence felt like mockery, proof that the chaos had been entirely orchestrated for my benefit. That evening, our smart TV system experienced one of its predictable meltdowns, as it had been doing with increasing frequency over the past month. The 65-inch Samsung display that dominated our living room had become the command center for my family's entertainment universe, connected to 3 different streaming services, a gaming console, and a complex sound system that my father had insisted on installing but never learned to operate. David sat in his recliner, cycling through the remote controls with the methodical desperation of someone trying to defuse a bomb. He had 3 different remotes spread across his lap, one for the TV, one for the cable box, and one for the sound system. None of them seemed to be communicating with their intended devices, creating a cacophony of competing signals and frustrated button mashing. "This piece of junk is broken again," he announced to the room, his voice carrying the particular whine of someone who expected technology to work like magic, but had never bothered to understand even its basic principles. Ethan, sprawled across the sectional sofa in his expensive athleisure wear, didn't even look up from his phone as he complained. "Dad, just call the cable company or something. I'm trying to watch the game, and this is seriously cutting into my relaxation time." My brother's definition of relaxation involved consumption of other people's efforts while contributing nothing himself. He had arrived home from his job at Peterson Financial with his usual fanfare, regaling us with stories of his latest client victories and the admiration of his colleagues. According to Ethan's daily narrative, he was single-handedly revolutionizing the world of investment banking, one brilliant deal at a time. I had been listening to this technological comedy from the kitchen, where I was cleaning up the dinner dishes that everyone else had abandoned immediately after eating. This had become our family's evening ritual. Dad would struggle with the TV, Ethan would complain about the inconvenience, Mom would disappear to her bedroom to watch shows on her tablet, and I would quietly fix whatever was broken while everyone else assumed the problem would somehow resolve itself. Without announcing my intentions or seeking permission, I dried my hands and walked to the entertainment center. The solution was always the same. Our internet router was an aging piece of hardware that overheated regularly and needed to be reset. I unplugged the device, counted to 30 while the family continued their complaints around me, then reconnected the power cable and Ethernet connections in the proper sequence. While the router rebooted, I used my phone to access our home network diagnostics and run a quick speed test to ensure optimal performance. The process took exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, transforming our living room from a chaotic battlefield of malfunctioning technology into a harmonious entertainment paradise. The TV sparked back to life, displaying Ethan's basketball game in crystal-clear high definition. The sound system synchronized perfectly, delivering surround sound that made our living room feel like a private theater. The streaming services reconnected automatically, and every device resumed its intended function as if nothing had ever been wrong. David settled back into his recliner with a satisfied grunt, his crisis immediately forgotten as he became absorbed in a documentary about World War II submarines. Ethan didn't even acknowledge what had happened, simply turning up the volume on his game and stretching out more comfortably on the sofa. My mother witnessed this entire sequence from the hallway, where she had emerged from her bedroom at the exact moment the TV began working again. She watched me return to the kitchen to finish the dishes, her expression unreadable but somehow weighted with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't gratitude or appreciation, but something darker, something that made my skin crawl even though I couldn't name it. This technological rescue operation had become so routine that I could perform it without conscious thought. I was the family's invisible IT department, the unpaid systems administrator who maintained the digital infrastructure that enabled their comfortable modern lifestyle. I managed their online banking, updated their software, backed up their photos, troubleshot their devices, optimized their network performance, and provided round-the-clock technical support for any digital emergency that arose. Yet somehow, my expertise existed in a strange paradox where it was simultaneously essential and worthless. When technology worked, my contributions were invisible and unremarkable. When it failed, the blame often fell on me for not preventing the problem or not fixing it quickly enough. I had become like the electrical grid or the water supply, utterly necessary but completely taken for granted until something went wrong. The pattern had established itself gradually over the years, so slowly that I hadn't noticed how thoroughly I had been transformed from family member to service provider. It started innocently enough when I was in college, studying computer science while living at home to save money. I would occasionally help my parents navigate a new smartphone or explain how to use a streaming service. But as technology became more central to their daily lives, and as their dependency grew, my role evolved from helpful daughter to essential infrastructure. When my father lost his job as a regional sales manager for a paper supply company, the family's financial responsibilities became even more intertwined with my technical skills. David had worked for Kendrick Industries for nearly 20 years, assuming his position was secure until corporate restructuring eliminated his entire division overnight. At 54, he suddenly found himself competing for jobs against candidates half his age, most of whom possessed digital skills he had never needed to develop. The unemployment benefits provided a temporary cushion, but managing the family's finances required navigating an increasingly complex web of online portals, digital forms, and automated systems that seemed designed to frustrate anyone over the age of 40. My mother had always handled the household bills by writing checks and mailing them in envelopes, a system that worked perfectly until companies began charging fees for paper statements and offering discounts for online payments. I gradually took over all of their digital financial management, not because they asked me to, but because the alternative was watching them struggle with tasks that seemed impossibly complicated to them but were second nature to me. I set up their online banking, automated their bill payments, organized their digital receipts, and created spreadsheets to track their spending and savings. When Carol decided to start an Instagram account to showcase her garden and connect with other suburban mothers, I spent an entire weekend teaching her how to use the app, editing her photos, and explaining the mysterious algorithms that determined whether her posts would be seen by other users. When Ethan needed help applying for his job at Peterson Financial, I reformatted his resume, optimized it for applicant tracking systems, and coached him through the company's multi-stage online interview process. Every technical success in my family's life had my fingerprints on it, yet somehow these achievements were always attributed to their own intelligence, determination, or good fortune. When Ethan landed his job, he regaled us with stories of how he had impressed the hiring managers with his technological savvy and professional presentation. When Carol's Instagram posts began receiving dozens of likes, she credited her natural eye for photography and her engaging personality. I had become the ghost in their machine, the invisible force that made their digital lives function seamlessly while receiving neither credit nor compensation for my efforts. Worse, my unemployment seemed to solidify their perception of me as someone who needed their charity, rather than someone who was providing invaluable services in exchange for a place to live. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during what should have been a celebratory Sunday dinner. Our family had maintained the tradition of Sunday meals, even through the worst of times, treating them as sacred gatherings that reinforced our bonds and celebrated our shared successes. Carol always cooked something elaborate, setting the dining room table with her good china and creating an atmosphere of prosperity and togetherness that felt increasingly hollow as the months passed. Ethan arrived home that afternoon in a rented BMW convertible, the kind of flashy display that he believed projected success and sophistication. He had been making increasingly extravagant purchases since landing his job, treating his newfound income as validation that he was destined for greatness. The car was Arctic white with tan leather interior, and he made sure to park it prominently in our circular driveway where the neighbors would be sure to notice. He entered the house carrying an expensive bottle of wine, some obscure vintage that had probably cost more than our family's weekly grocery budget. His smile was radiant with self-satisfaction, the expression of someone who believed the universe had finally recognized his inherent superiority and was rewarding him accordingly. "Ethan, my golden boy," Carol practically sang as she embraced him, her voice carrying the kind of maternal pride typically reserved for Nobel Prize winners or Olympic champions. "Tell me everything. I want to hear about every detail of your success." My brother's false modesty was a perfectly choreographed performance, rehearsed and refined through months of similar conversations. He had learned to downplay his achievements just enough to seem humble, while ensuring that everyone understood the magnitude of his accomplishments. "Just closed another deal, Mom. Nothing too extraordinary, but the client was pleased with my strategic analysis." He paused for dramatic effect, savoring the anticipation he was building. "Actually, I've been looking at real estate downtown. There's a condo development that caught my attention, something with serious investment potential." Carol's eyes lit up with the fervor of someone who had discovered the meaning of life. Her son's success had become her primary source of identity and validation, proof that she had raised a winner who would carry the family name to new heights of prosperity and social status. "A condo! Oh, Ethan, that's wonderful. Tell me everything about it. What does it look like? How much are they asking? When can you move in?" Ethan proceeded to describe his prospective purchase in exhaustive detail, painting a picture of luxury and sophistication that made our modest suburban home seem shabby by comparison. The unit featured floor-to-ceiling windows with city views, premium appliances, granite countertops, and access to building amenities that included a fitness center, rooftop terrace, and concierge services. The only challenge is the down payment, he admitted with calculated vulnerability. I've got excellent credit and income, but I want to secure the best possible interest rate, which means putting down at least 20%. That's where I might need some family support, just temporarily until my next bonus comes through. My mother's response was immediate and unconditional. Your father and I will help with the down payment. We can pull from our retirement savings. It's an investment in your future, and that's exactly what that money is for. The fork slipped from my hand, clattering against my plate with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent dining room. I had been managing my parents' finances for over 2 years, which meant I knew exactly how precarious their situation had become since my father's unemployment. Their retirement fund was a collection of modest savings accounts and a small 401k that had been battered by market volatility and early withdrawal penalties. Mom, you can't do that, I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest like floodwater. That money is for your retirement. Dad's unemployment benefits are running out, and you're both going to need every dollar of those savings to get through the next few years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as my words registered. I had committed the cardinal sin of contradicting my mother's grand gesture of support for her golden child, and I could see the storm clouds gathering in her expression. Ethan's laugh was sharp and cruel, designed to cut rather than amuse. What would you possibly know about financial planning, Anya? Just because you're stuck in a rut doesn't mean you get to sabotage everyone else's success. Are you seriously going to undermine this out of pure jealousy? His words were calculated cruelty, designed to wound me in the places where I was most vulnerable. He knew exactly how to exploit my insecurities about my unemployment, my living situation, and my perceived failures compared to his obvious success. I'm not being jealous, I replied, fighting to keep my voice level and reasonable. I'm being realistic about our family's financial situation. I manage all of your online accounts, so I know exactly how much money is available and how quickly it's being depleted. Pulling $40,000 from retirement savings for a condo down payment isn't an investment, it's a gamble with money you can't afford to lose. Carol had been building toward this explosion for months, and my financial analysis provided the perfect trigger for unleashing years of accumulated resentment. She rose from her chair like an avenging angel, her face flushed with righteous fury and something deeper, something that had been festering beneath the surface of our family dynamics for longer than I had realized. How dare you, she said, her voice dropping into that tone of cold fury that I remembered from my childhood, the voice that preceded the worst punishments and the most devastating criticisms. How dare you sit at this table, eating food that your father and I provide, living in a house that we pay for, and have the audacity to lecture us about financial responsibility? She was just getting started, and I could see her working up to something that would leave permanent damage. This wasn't just anger about the condo or the retirement savings. This was something that had been building for years, a reservoir of contempt that was finally overflowing. Look at yourself, Anya, she continued, each word precisely enunciated for maximum impact. 29 years old, unemployed for 6 months, no prospects, no relationship, no achievements worth mentioning. You're exactly like one of those parasites on nature documentaries, the ones that attach themselves to healthy organisms and slowly drain them of life. The comparison hit me like a physical blow, but she wasn't finished. She had found her rhythm now, and the words poured out with the force of a dam breaking. You're nothing but a leech, sucking us dry while contributing absolutely nothing of value to this family. Every meal you eat, every utility bill you help drive up, every moment of our time you waste with your problems and failures, it's all just taking. If you can't support this family's success, if you can't celebrate your brother's achievements without trying to tear them down, then get out of our sight. We don't need dead weight dragging us down. The silence that followed was more devastating than any scream. Every person in the room was frozen, as if Carol's words had crystallized the air itself and made movement impossible. I looked around the table, searching for any sign of disagreement, any indication that someone might challenge her assessment of my worth as a human being. My father sat perfectly still, studying his hands with the intensity of someone who had discovered the secrets of the universe written across his knuckles. His passivity wasn't neutral, it was a choice. He was actively deciding to let this happen, to let his wife destroy his daughter rather than risk the conflict that would come with defending me. Ethan wore an expression of smug satisfaction, as if my public humiliation was exactly the entertainment he had been hoping for. He had always resented sharing our parents' attention, and seeing me reduced to nothing more than a burden and disappointment clearly brought him joy. "You're absolutely right, Mom," I said finally, standing up from the table with movements that felt mechanical and disconnected from my consciousness. My voice was eerily calm, as if I were discussing the weather rather than accepting my exile from the family I had spent my entire life trying to please. A leech shouldn't overstay its welcome. I walked upstairs to my childhood bedroom, a space that had remained virtually unchanged since high school despite my adult presence. The walls were still decorated with outdated posters and participation ribbons from activities I had long since abandoned. The bookshelf contained romance novels and young adult fiction that belonged to a version of myself I barely remembered. I began throwing essential items into my largest backpack: clothes for a few days, my laptop and chargers, important documents, and the small amount of cash I kept hidden in an old jewelry box. Everything else, all the accumulated possessions of nearly 3 decades of life, would have to be abandoned. I was leaving with exactly what I could carry, starting over with nothing but my skills and whatever strength I could muster. Within an hour, I was standing on Maya's doorstep in the gathering darkness, my entire life reduced to what I could carry on my shoulders. Maya took one look at my face and pulled me inside without asking a single question. She had been my closest friend since college, one of the few people who truly understood my family dynamics, and had repeatedly warned me about the toxicity I was enabling by accepting their treatment. For the first time in months, I broke down completely, sobbing into her shoulder as the full weight of my situation crashed over me like a tsunami. I felt like a complete failure, a burden, exactly what my mother had called me. 29 years old and homeless, unemployed and apparently unemployable, with no safety net except the kindness of a friend who probably pitied me more than she respected me. "They don't deserve you, Anya," Maya said fiercely, stroking my hair as I cried. "They've been blind to what they had, and now they're going to learn what it means to lose it. You're going to show them exactly how wrong they were about everything." The next morning, I woke up on Maya's couch with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The pain was still there, sharp and constant, but underneath it was something else. Determination. I was done being invisible. I was done being taken for granted. I was done seeking approval from people who would never value me no matter what I accomplished. Maya had left early for her job at a marketing firm, but she had prepared coffee and left a note with her spare key and a simple message. "Stay as long as you need. You're going to be amazing." The faith she showed in me was more than my family had ever demonstrated, and it provided the foundation I needed to begin rebuilding my life from scratch. I started small, almost pathetically so, taking on freelance projects that barely paid enough to contribute to Maya's grocery bills. I fixed computers for her neighbors, charging $20 to remove viruses and optimize performance. I designed basic websites for local businesses, creating simple but functional online presences for restaurants, hair salons, and small retail shops. Each project was a tiny victory, proof that I had value outside of my family's narrow and destructive definition of worth. The restaurant owner was thrilled with the online ordering system I created. The hair salon saw an immediate increase in bookings after I redesigned their website and optimized it for mobile devices. Word began to spread slowly through Maya's neighborhood about the tech consultant who actually cared about her client's success, rather than just collecting fees and disappearing. My breakthrough came when Maya introduced me to Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who had been struggling to sell her handmade pottery online. Dorothy Henderson was 73 years old, a retired art teacher who had been creating beautiful ceramic pieces in her garage studio for over 2 decades. Her work was exquisite, featuring intricate glazes and unique designs that deserved a much wider audience than the occasional craft fair or church bazaar. Mrs. Henderson had attempted to sell her pottery through various online platforms, but she was overwhelmed by the technical requirements and marketing challenges of e-commerce. Her existing website was a disaster of broken links and blurry photos that made her beautiful work look amateurish and unappealing. I didn't just build her a new website. I became invested in her success in a way that surprised both of us. I spent hours photographing her pottery, experimenting with lighting and angles until each piece looked like museum-quality art. I wrote compelling product descriptions that told the story behind each creation, connecting potential customers with the passion and skill that went into every bowl, vase, and decorative piece. But the real transformation came when I taught Mrs. Henderson how to manage her own online presence. I showed her how to photograph her work, how to write engaging social media posts, how to analyze her sales data, and how to build relationships with customers who appreciated handmade artistry. You're not just selling pottery, Mrs. Henderson, I explained during one of our weekly training sessions. You're selling the story of a master craftsperson who has dedicated her life to creating beauty. Every piece has a history, a personality, a reason to exist. That's what people are really buying when they choose handmade over mass-produced. Within 3 months, Mrs. Henderson's pottery business was thriving beyond her wildest dreams. Her pieces were selling to customers across the country, and she had developed a waiting list for custom commissions. More importantly, she had regained confidence in her abilities and discovered joy in sharing her work with people who truly appreciated it. Mrs. Henderson was so grateful for the transformation that she began referring me to other small business owners in her community. She spoke about me with the enthusiasm of someone who had witnessed a miracle, describing how I had taken her failing hobby and turned it into a legitimate source of income and artistic fulfillment. Word spread quickly through networks of small business owners who had been struggling with the same digital challenges. I began working with a bakery that wanted to expand beyond their physical location, a massage therapist who needed to manage online bookings, and a vintage clothing boutique that wanted to reach younger customers through social media marketing. Each project taught me something new about business, about people, and about my own capabilities. I discovered that I had an intuitive understanding of what small business owners needed from technology, and more importantly, I had the patience and communication skills to teach them how to maintain their digital presence independently. I founded Phoenix Digital 6 months after leaving home, operating out of a small studio apartment that felt like a palace compared to the emotional prison I had escaped. The name wasn't subtle, but it was honest and meaningful. I was rising from the ashes of my old life, reborn as someone who refused to accept less than she deserved. The apartment was tiny, but entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every decorative choice, every organizational system reflected my preferences rather than someone else's expectations. I painted the walls in colors that made me happy, arranged my workspace for optimal productivity, and created an environment that supported my goals rather than undermining them. My first real office was a converted bedroom with 2 desks, one for client meetings and one for my actual work. I invested in professional lighting for video calls, a high-quality camera for product photography, and a reliable printer for contracts and marketing materials. Every purchase was carefully considered and paid for with money I had earned through my own efforts. The ultimate validation came when Technova Solutions, the same startup that had interviewed me during my mother's vacuum performance, reached out with an unexpected opportunity. Sarah Chen, the CTO who had witnessed my family's sabotage, had been following my work with Phoenix Digital through mutual connections in the tech community. I have to admit, Sarah said during our preliminary conversation, I was initially concerned about your professionalism based on our first interview, but your portfolio with small business clients is impressive, and I've heard excellent things about your work ethic and results. The position they offered was a senior management role focused on helping their clients implement digital transformation strategies. The salary exceeded my wildest expectations, and the responsibilities aligned perfectly with the skills I had developed through Phoenix Digital. This time, I conducted the interview from my own space, in complete control of my environment and my narrative. I appreciate the opportunity, I told Sarah, but I want to be transparent about what happened during our first interview. My family was deliberately sabotaging my call because they viewed my professional success as a threat to their own dynamics. I've since removed myself from that toxic environment and built a business that allows me to help other people achieve their digital goals. Sarah's response surprised me. That actually makes me more interested in hiring you, not less. Anyone who can build a successful consulting practice while dealing with that kind of family pressure clearly has the resilience and independence we need in our management team. Meanwhile, my family was discovering what life looked like without their invisible systems administrator. The problems started small, the kind of minor inconveniences that could be dismissed as temporary glitches or normal wear and tear. Their smart home system began malfunctioning in increasingly creative ways, transforming their house from a showcase of modern convenience into a technological nightmare. The smart thermostat, which I had programmed with careful attention to their schedules and preferences, began developing a mind of its own. It would randomly spike the temperature to 85 degrees in the middle of summer, or drop it to 58 degrees during winter nights. The automated lighting system started turning on and off at random intervals, creating a disco effect that made their evenings feel like a seizure-inducing rave. The smart doorbell, which had provided them with convenient package delivery notifications and security monitoring, stopped recognizing their faces and began treating them like potential intruders. It would blast alerts to their phones whenever they approached their own front door, and the two-way communication feature developed a feedback loop that made normal conversation impossible. But the real chaos began when the automated bill payment system I had carefully constructed started falling apart like a house of cards. I had set up dozens of recurring payments, automatic transfers, and scheduled transactions that maintained their financial obligations without requiring any manual intervention. Every utility bill, insurance payment, mortgage installment, and subscription service had been programmed to deduct funds from their accounts on predetermined dates. The system worked flawlessly as long as passwords remained current, security questions were answered correctly, and account information stayed updated. But when I left, I took with me all the knowledge of how these systems functioned, what websites required what information, and how to troubleshoot problems when they inevitably arose. The first sign of trouble came when their internet service was disconnected for non-payment. The automated payment had failed because the credit card on file had expired, and nobody in the family knew how to update the information or even which card was supposed to be charged. Without internet access, their smart home system lost its connection to the cloud servers that controlled everything from their thermostat to their security cameras. Ethan, flush with confidence from his recent professional success, decided to take charge of the situation. He approached the technological crisis with the same aggressive confidence that had served him well in financial negotiations, assuming that problems could be solved through determination and superior intelligence. His first mistake was attempting to log into their primary banking account to update the payment information. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember the password, the security questions, or even the username I had established for their online access. After 5 failed login attempts, the bank's security system locked the account and required an in-person visit with photo identification to restore access. The account lockout triggered a cascade of financial disasters. Automatic payments that depended on that account began failing across the board. Their mortgage payment bounced, generating late fees and threatening letters from the bank. Their car insurance lapsed, leaving them potentially liable for any accidents or damage. Their health insurance payments failed, jeopardizing their coverage just as David was dealing with some minor but concerning health issues related to stress and unemployment. But Ethan's most spectacular failure came when he decided to take control of their email accounts to prevent further communication breakdowns. In his haste to demonstrate his technological competence, he clicked on a phishing email that had been cleverly designed to look like a security alert from their bank. The email claimed that suspicious activity had been detected on their account and urged immediate action to prevent unauthorized access. It provided a link to what appeared to be the bank's official website, complete with logos, color schemes, and security badges that looked completely authentic to someone who hadn't been trained to recognize such sophisticated deceptions. Ethan enthusiastically entered their social security numbers, account information, and even the temporary passwords he had created during his earlier troubleshooting attempts. Within hours, their credit card information had been sold to identity thieves who began making purchases across 3 different states. The financial carnage was swift and comprehensive. Fraudulent charges appeared on every credit card and debit card linked to their accounts. Their credit scores plummeted as missed payments and suspicious activity triggered automated security measures across their entire financial portfolio. Collection agencies began calling about overdue payments on accounts they didn't even remember having. When David finally received the certified letter from their mortgage company threatening foreclosure proceedings, he realized that their family had descended from comfortable middle-class stability into potential homelessness in less than 6 weeks. His phone call to me came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of a strategy session with a potential new client. I had been expecting this call for weeks, and I was surprised it had taken them so long to swallow their pride and admit they needed help. Anya. His voice was shaky, desperate in a way I had never heard before. You have to come home. Everything is falling apart. What did you do to us? I was sitting in my professional office space, surrounded by awards and testimonials from satisfied clients, when I took his call. The irony wasn't lost on me that he assumed I had somehow sabotaged them from a distance, rather than recognizing that I had simply stopped providing free technical support for people who had treated me like garbage. I didn't do anything, Dad, I replied, with the calm professionalism I had developed through months of client consultations. I'm no longer the system administrator for your household. If you'd like to hire Phoenix Digital for technical consulting, my standard rate is $200 per hour with a minimum engagement of 4 hours. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before he hung up without another word. 2 days later, all 3 of them appeared outside my apartment building. They looked haggard, defeated, nothing like the confident family who had dismissed me so easily months before. Carol's usually perfect hair was disheveled, and her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. David appeared to have aged 5 years in the past few months. His shoulders slumped with the weight of problems he couldn't solve. Even Ethan's usual swagger had been replaced by nervous energy and darting glances that suggested he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of his incompetence. Seeing them there, I felt no satisfaction, no desire for revenge. Instead, I felt something like pity mixed with a profound sense of closure. Anya, Carol spoke first, the words clearly painful for her to voice. I'm sorry. We were wrong. We need your help. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes, but he managed to mumble, please. I looked at each of them in turn, these people who had shaped my understanding of my own worth for so many years. I can help you, I said finally, but there are conditions. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop near my apartment where I laid out a formal service contract. The fee was symbolic, $1, but the terms were non-negotiable. They would participate in a mandatory digital literacy training session, where I would teach them the basic skills they needed to manage their own technological needs. What followed was perhaps the most therapeutic hour of my life. I patiently walked them through password management, email security, online banking procedures, and basic troubleshooting techniques. I watched my brother, the financial expert, struggle with concepts that any teenager would grasp intuitively. I saw my parents fumbled with tasks I had been performing effortlessly for years, while receiving no recognition or appreciation. Look carefully at this email, Ethan, I said, pointing to an obvious phishing attempt on my laptop screen. Can you identify the red flags that indicate this is a fraudulent message trying to steal your personal information? His face flushed with embarrassment as he admitted he couldn't tell the difference between the fake email and a legitimate security alert. I patiently explained the subtle indicators that revealed the deception. Slightly misspelled URLs, grammatical errors, urgent language designed to bypass critical thinking, and requests for sensitive information that legitimate companies would never make via email. A financial professional should be able to spot these immediately, I said matter-of-factly, without malice but with enough emphasis to drive home the irony of the situation. These are exactly the kinds of scams that target people who think they're too smart to be fooled. Quote, The training session continued with painful slowness as I guided them through tasks that had become second nature to me. I showed Carol how to update her social media privacy settings, explaining why accepting friend requests from strangers could compromise her personal information. I demonstrated to David how to recognize legitimate software updates versus malicious downloads that could infect their computer with viruses. Each lesson was a small humiliation for people who had spent months treating me like I was incompetent and worthless. They struggled with concepts I had mastered in high school, asked questions that revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of technology they used every day, and made mistakes that could have been avoided with the most basic digital education. I don't understand why this is so complicated, Carol complained after failing to successfully reset a password for the third time. Technology should just work without requiring a computer science degree. It does work, I replied patiently, when you take the time to learn the basic principles instead of expecting someone else to handle everything for you. These aren't advanced concepts. This is digital literacy that most people your age manage to acquire through practice and attention. The most revealing moment came when I asked them to explain what they thought I had been doing for their family over the past few years. They had such a minimal understanding of the technical infrastructure I had maintained that they couldn't even articulate what services I had provided. You fix things when they broke, David offered hesitantly. I helped you with your phone sometimes, Carol added, as if occasional technical support was the extent of my contributions. Ethan remained silent, perhaps beginning to understand that his dismissive attitude toward my useless skills had been catastrophically wrong. I pulled out a detailed list I had prepared, documenting every system I had managed, every account I had maintained, every recurring task I had performed to keep their digital lives functioning smoothly. The list covered 3 pages of single-spaced text, describing services that would have cost them thousands of dollars per month if they had hired professional IT support. I managed 14 different online accounts for this family, I began, reading from my documentation. I maintained your network security, performed regular software updates, backed up your photos and documents, optimized your internet performance, troubleshot hardware problems, managed your online banking, set up and maintained automated bill payments, created and updated your social media profiles, designed and maintained your home security system, programmed your smart home devices, provided round-the-clock technical support, researched and purchased all technology-related products, and served as your personal cybersecurity consultant. The silence that followed was profound. They were finally beginning to understand the scope of what they had lost when they drove me away, the magnitude of services they had taken for granted while treating me like a burden and a failure. Each of these services has market value, I continued, pulling out a second document that detailed the commercial rates for equivalent professional support. If you hired external consultants to provide the same level of service I was providing for free, your monthly technology costs would exceed $1,500. Carol's face had gone pale as she processed the financial implications of their technological incompetence. David stared at the documentation as if it were written in a foreign language. Ethan finally looked up from his phone, his usual confidence replaced by something that might have been shame. When the training was complete, I handed them a USB drive containing all their passwords, recovery information, and step-by-step guides for maintaining their systems. This is everything you need, I told them. From now on, you're completely self-sufficient. Then, in front of all 3 of them, I opened my laptop and systematically removed my administrative access from every account I had managed for the past 2 years. Each confirmation dialogue felt like cutting another rope that had bound me to their dysfunction, severing connections that had enabled their dependence while enabling my own exploitation. Are you sure you want to permanently delete your access? The final pop-up asked. I clicked confirm without hesitation, watching as my name disappeared from their bank accounts, their social media profiles, their utility companies, and their insurance portals. Years of careful organization and maintenance were being erased with each mouse click, leaving them to navigate their digital lives without the safety net I had provided. I want to be very clear about something, I said, looking directly at my mother for the final time. I was never the leech in this relationship. I was the life raft you threw away when you decided you didn't need it anymore. Good luck navigating these waters on your own. Hoot. As I gathered my materials and prepared to leave, Ethan finally spoke up. Wait, he said, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. What if we need help? What if something goes wrong? I paused at the coffee shop door, considering his question. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of family obligation, the deeply ingrained impulse to sacrifice my own well-being for their convenience. But that impulse felt distant now, like an echo from someone else's life. Then you'll figure it out, I said simply. Or you'll hire a professional. Or you'll learn to live without the technology you can't manage. Those are all valid choices that adults make every day. Quote. The months that followed were a whirlwind of professional growth and personal discovery. My reputation in the small business community continued to expand, driven by client referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations. I began speaking at local business networking events, sharing insights about digital transformation and helping other entrepreneurs avoid the common pitfalls that I had learned to navigate. Phoenix Digital evolved from a one-person operation into a small but thriving consultancy. I hired my first employee, a recent college graduate named Marcus, who shared my passion for helping small businesses succeed in the digital marketplace. Together, we developed standardized processes for website development, social media management, and e-commerce optimization that allowed us to serve more clients while maintaining the personal attention that had become our signature. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying in ways my previous corporate job had never been. Every client's success felt personal. Every problem we solved contributed to someone's livelihood and dreams. I was building something meaningful with my skills and knowledge, creating value that was recognized and compensated fairly. But the real transformation was internal. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself, making decisions based on my own values and priorities rather than trying to please people who would never be satisfied. I joined a hiking club and discovered that I loved spending time outdoors. I took a pottery class and found unexpected joy in creating beautiful objects with my hands. I began dating again, approaching relationships with newfound confidence and clear boundaries about how I expected to be treated. The phone calls from my family started about 3 months after our coffee shop meeting. The first few times, I let them go to voicemail, not quite ready to engage with the people who had caused me so much pain. When I finally listened to the messages, they were exactly what I had expected. Requests for help disguised as family news. Manipulative attempts to guilt me into resuming my role as their unpaid technical support. "Anya, it's Dad," the first message began. "Hope you're doing well. The cable box is acting up again, and we can't figure out how to fix it. Could you maybe stop by this weekend? Mom is making your favorite dinner." The offer of my favorite dinner was particularly insulting, as if a home-cooked meal could compensate for months of emotional abuse and exploitation. It also revealed how little they understood about the fundamental changes in our relationship. I wasn't a child who could be bribed with comfort food. I was an adult professional who charged market rates for technical consulting services. The messages became more frequent and more desperate as their technological problems multiplied. Their smart home system had completely stopped functioning, leaving them unable to control their heating, lighting, or security features. Their internet service had been downgraded to the slowest available speed because they couldn't navigate the company's website to modify their service plan. Most critically, they were facing serious financial consequences because they still couldn't manage their online banking or automatic payments without constant assistance. "Anya, please call us back." Carol's voice was strained with frustration in one particularly lengthy voicemail. "We're not asking you to move back home or anything dramatic. We just need someone to help us sort out this computer mess. Ethan tried to fix things, but he made everything worse. We're willing to pay you for your time." The offer of payment was interesting, suggesting that they were finally beginning to understand that my expertise had monetary value. But their tone still carried the expectation that I would prioritize their problems over my own life and business, that family obligation would compel me to drop everything and rescue them from the consequences of their own choices. I never returned those calls. Instead, I focused on building my business and my new life, surrounding myself with people who valued my contributions and treated me with respect. Maya became more than my best friend. She became my business partner, using her marketing expertise to help Phoenix Digital reach new clients and expand our service offerings. 6 months later, I was standing in front of a room full of executives at the Regional Chamber of Commerce, delivering a presentation about digital transformation strategies for traditional businesses. The audience was engaged and impressed, asking thoughtful questions about implementation timelines and return on investment calculations. After the presentation, several business owners approached me with consulting requests, and I scheduled follow-up meetings that would likely result in significant new contracts. My success had attracted attention from larger companies as well. Technova Solutions had offered me the senior management position, and I was seriously considering accepting their proposal. The role would provide financial security and professional prestige, but it would also mean giving up the independence and entrepreneurial satisfaction of running my own business. As I walked through the park near my office that evening, enjoying the late afternoon sunshine and the sense of accomplishment that came from a successful presentation, my phone buzzed with a text message from Maya. Saw your presentation online. The local business journal posted a video. You're going to be famous. So proud of you. Quote. The recognition felt surreal. Less than a year ago, I had been invisible in my own family, my contributions dismissed, and my value questioned. Now I was being recognized as an expert in my field, sought after by businesses and organizations that valued my knowledge and experience. A moment later, another notification appeared on my phone. Call from Mom. I stared at the screen for exactly 1 second, considering the possibility of answering. Part of me was curious about what she might say, whether months of struggling with their technological problems had given her any insight into what she had lost when she drove me away. But a larger part of me recognized that answering that call would be stepping backward into a dynamic that had nearly destroyed my sense of self-worth. I smiled and declined the call, then slipped the phone back into my pocket and continued walking toward the sunset. The silence that followed wasn't the punishing isolation of my childhood home. It was the peaceful quiet of a life lived on my own terms, free from the noise of people who had never learned to value what they had. For the first time in my life, the silence was my choice, not my punishment. I was finally, completely free.